Hi, welcome back. Well, it was a tragedy that transfixed the world for quite a while. Germanwings Flight 9525 that went down into a mountain, a deliberate act of the pilot by the look of it, 150 people killed. And today with me in the studio is John Menzies, who could have very easily been on that flight.
Yeah.
So, John, when you got home to the bosom of your family, what was the reaction from them?
Well, probably the reaction occurred long before I got back to the family because we were on business and it was a few weeks before we got back. But yes, it was something that could have turned out completely different if not for the kind intervention of a stranger. And we were on business in Portugal and Spain and having to make our way to a conference in Germany.
Okay, and Dusseldorf was the eventual destination of that fated flight, and you were also headed there. Now, look, before we do get into that, John, I just wanted to go back, just take you back a little bit, because this has been a bit of a theme for your spiritual life, hasn't it? This sort of brush with death. You were telling me earlier that there was a time in your life where you fell victim to this trend of the outdoors, and golf perhaps is more interesting than church. What was going on there?
Well, I guess I was getting a bit lax in my spiritual life, and my family would go to church on the weekend, and I decided that I enjoyed playing golf more, and so that's what I was doing more regularly than going to church. And obviously God decided there was a strategic intervention that was required and gave me a really good flick in the ear when I was in India.
Which was what? What happened?
Oh, well, I was connecting on another business flight between Delhi and Hyderabad, and then on to Mumbai to fly on to Europe for some research work that I was doing. And we arrived in the domestic lounge, and I accidentally walked outside the terminal instead of catching the bus to the international.
This is in Mumbai,
This is in Mumbai, yeah,
okay.
A domestic. And so a very helpful taxi driver called a taxi, and a taxi came in front of the rest of the queue and jumped in. He
Special
had a
treatment.
Yes, mobile phone in the hand, and he jumps into the taxi, then off we go down the dark alley. And so he wanted thousands and thousands of rupees for a 200 rupiah drive, and of course I'm in travel between destinations. I didn't have the money. And so he was very explicit about what he was going to do to me. So he ended up taking all the money that I had, but not enough for what he wanted. And then another vehicle came in behind us with another 4 men, and I thought, I'm in big trouble. But it was a taxi swap. They moved my bags into the other taxi and then sent me off to the airport. But then the new taxi...
Oh, that was kind of it.
Yeah, but they took me down another dark alley.
Oh, okay.
And I thought that that was the end of it, but the taxi driver just got out and wandered out of the back of the taxi, and I thought this was it. They're really going to finish the job. And I started praying. And so that situation, when I got back home after that one, because it really knocked me around, it shook my confidence in my travelling by myself, which I'd done for a long time, never had an incident before, and I thought I was going to die. And I started praying, and I thought to myself, well, if golf's more important, why am I praying now? So I went to church for the first time that weekend with my family and got myself saved again. Wow.
So it was a real turning point for you.
Yes, it was.
Incredible. But you did manage, obviously, to keep travelling, because here you are again, just not that long ago in Europe. So now that we have a little bit of perspective on that, how was it that you came so close to being on that flight, and how was it that you missed it?
Well, like I was saying before, we were in business in Portugal and Spain and having to make our way through to Dusseldorf. Of course, there was a conference in Cologne, and we'd finished our appointments and was connecting from Oporto in Portugal through to Dusseldorf and then onto Dusseldorf. And when we flew into Barcelona from Oporto, we were about an hour late, and so we weren't making the connection very well. And we told the ground staff, and they said if we got across to the other terminal, which is quite a distance away, we'd be okay. When we got there, they said, flight's closed, you can't get on. You're on the flight the next morning, which was the doomed flight.
Okay. So you were told at this point, I'm sorry, sir. Yes, you and your colleague were there. I'm sorry, sir. You're not going to be able to make this flight. You're going to have to wait for tomorrow and fly from Barcelona to Dusseldorf, which was that Germanwings Flight 9525 that eventually went down. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm a bit persistent, and and I said, aren't we already checked in? Because that was the person who actually made a difference. We were in a Porto, we couldn't check in online. Often they overbook these flights, and if you get there and you're not checked in, and if you're late particularly, you're not going to get on your flight. And a young lady actually went and opened up the Lufthansa office again, and by personal phone got us booked onto that flight. And if she hadn't gone out of her way to do that, then we would not have got onto that flight. We would have been put onto the one the next morning.
Wow.
The interesting thing is that this young lady then reached out by Facebook. I saw Anna was the name, and we'd met with an Anna
after the crash.
Yeah, but this is before we knew there was a crash. We didn't even know there had been a crash, and Anna sent a friend message, and so I thought it was another Anna that was at a research institute that we just visited, and I accepted it. And then this message came through from Anna saying, "John, are you there?" And so from then we've actually been in contact with Anna, and she tells me the reason we connected so well was that being a food scientist, and she loves Australian MasterChef, she put the two together. We had a good old chat about food.
Boy, if you had been on that ill-fated flight that did go down into the mountain, reflecting on that, how did that feel for you? Like in terms of, I mean, it would have been a pretty awful feeling, I imagine. Yeah,
well, it was that evening. My colleague I was travelling with, and I was sitting down for dinner, and his wife had just made contact with him, wondering whether he'd been on that flight. So that was pretty traumatic for his family.
Because they knew you were going to Dusseldorf.
Yeah, and they knew we were on a Germanwings Flight, and they knew the itinerary, and it was pretty close. Because even Anna, the person from Lufthansa, thought we'd been on the flight until she could confirm that we were alive. She'd been in tears all morning. So when we were sitting down for dinner, Ben, the guy I was travelling with, said, "Do you realise that was pretty close, John?" And then we stopped and reflected, and it was sort of like stops you in your track, like what may have been. But for some reason, or not for some reason, I know the reason, there was a calmness that I had that we didn't get into that situation for some reason that God obviously had. But even if I had have ended up being on that flight, then I was still comfortable that my salvation was secure.
Wow. Now, your mate Ben, who doesn't have a particular faith at this stage, he wanted to go into a cathedral and burn a candle. Is that right?
Yeah, the next day we went and visited the Cologne Cathedral, and we got there late, and they were closing it down. So we just got ourselves through in time, and of course it's a beautiful cathedral, and the feeling of reverence and awe is just all over that building. But
not part of your faith tradition particularly.
No.
And as you've told me, he's not particularly religious at all. So, but nevertheless, there you are.
Yeah, and so can we burn a candle? So we did, and I felt really good.
Wow, incredible. I guess one thing that troubles me a little bit about this, John, is to think, wow, it almost appears, that God stepped in and there's some divine intervention in you not being on that plane. It so very easily could have happened. But then I think of the 150 people who did perish on, Germanwings 9525. Can you make any sense of, why you and not them?
It's something you can never make sense of, and it's something that makes you feel very sad. And because you have all these intense feelings yourself after a situation like that, you know that all of those families must have gone through that in bucket loads because they actually lost their loved ones. And there's many things that happen in this world that there's no reason for, and a lot of people like to say it's God's fault. But what people forget, there's a devil out there too doing his work.
True.
And we don't know why some people are saved and some people aren't. Some people die, some people live. But that's what God knows, because he knows the beginning from the end. And so maybe there's something that Ben and I still have to do in this life that God has planned for us.
Well, it's confronting stuff, but thanks so much for being here, John, to share your story. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
We'll be back in just a second.